I have been very happy with my M1 MacBook Air for more than a year and was reluctant to move on to its successor, but I still picked one up nonetheless just to find out whether it is worth upgrading. Of course, you may have already seen things such as benchmarks, so I'm not going to cover that in this video, and you can check out YouTuber MaxTech for all of that, which I'll put the links below. This video is more on helping you to decide whether to go for the M1 or M2 MacBook Air, as I share my thoughts on what I like and dislike about them. So let's get on with it. Both of these MacBook Airs are still incredibly well built as of today, even though the M1 model is looking dated with its thicker screen bezels and the signature wedge design. But this doesn't necessarily mean that the M2 wins in every design aspect. Sure enough, the M2 MacBook Air gets a similar design language as the current MacBook Pros and is lighter and slimmer than the M1. It has rounded edges that's nicer to rest your palm on, larger function roll keys with a matching size Touch ID sensor, but that webcam notch might annoy if you have OCD, and you waste that extra 0.2 inches of screen estate when you run a full screen app, which ultimately makes it look like an M1 MacBook Air screen if you put them side by side. The M2 MacBook Air's 13.6-inch display may have a higher max brightness at 500 nits, but despite that, both displays aren't going to be super visible when you use it at bright outdoors. But either way, they are pretty bright and sufficient enough for indoor usage already, so to be honest, I don't really find having that extra brightness to be too useful as compared to the M1 MacBook Air. So both the M1 and M2 MacBook Airs have excellent loudspeakers and feature very different soundstage. The M1 has up-firing stereo speakers, whereas the M2 has a 4-speaker system located at the top part of the keyboard that also supports spatial audio. But I personally prefer the M1 MacBook speaker placement when playing audio in a room, as it sounds slightly louder with a wider soundstage, which is very useful if you're showing a video or presenting something with audio on a meeting table. The M2 speaker soundstage is a little tight, which is good if you're sitting right in front, though it doesn't fill a room as well as the M1 speakers. But once you play something with spatial audio, it sounds a lot better than the M1 speakers. But ask yourselves, how often do you play content that has spatial audio? One of the most welcoming features about the M2 MacBook Air is the return of MagSafe Charging, which gives you an extra USB-C port for connecting peripherals while charging, and also reduces the chance of someone tripping over your charging cable that causes your MacBook to drop on the floor, which makes it one major reason to consider the M2 over the M1 if you are always tethered to the wall socket. But in my case, I've gotten used to USB-C charging, and I usually use it up with a USB PD power bank, as I don't want to carry an extra cable in the bag, so I usually leave the MagSafe cable in the office when I'm on the go. Furthermore, I can easily purchase a USB PD cable for as cheap as 25 ringgit in most shops, as compared to 189 ringgit for a MagSafe to USB-C cable if I break it or misplace it. Speaking of charging, the M2 MacBook Air charges faster as it maxes out at 70 watts as compared to 30 watts on the M1. This is something that you should keep in mind if you're someone that's forgetful about charging a laptop all the time, as you will definitely get more juice on the M2 for the same charging time. If you do a lot of video calls, the M2 MacBook Air is unquestionably the one you should go for because the Full HD webcam looks way better than the M1's HD webcam. But to be honest, this isn't the best Full HD webcam I've seen on a laptop, as it lacks sharpness and has a skin smoothing effect which some people might not like. And most people I know that does a lot of video calls will most likely invest in an external webcam, which is why the M1 MacBook Air's thicker top screen bezel can become useful when you mount an external webcam on top, and it doesn't affect your viewing experience. Finally, let's talk about value. The M1 and M2 MacBook Air starting price differ by 1,100 ringgit in Malaysia, and the latter can become very pricey if you opt for more storage and RAM. Granted, you basically pay more for better hardware on the M2 MacBook Air, and you could have gotten the more capable 14-inch MacBook Pro by just paying slightly more if you can live with a slightly heavier laptop. But if you only have these two MacBook Airs to consider, the M1 MacBook Air isn't going to be a day and night difference from the M2 MacBook Air in terms of everyday usability. It still works extremely well and probably already an overkill for basic productivity workflows. Not unless you appreciate MagSafe, a better webcam, faster charging, and a slightly larger and brighter display. My recommendation? Go for the M1 MacBook Air if you merely want a fast and power-efficient MacBook. go for the M2 if you can spend that extra cash, because those additional hardware features are definitely worth paying for the premium. I know it's still a hard choice, but it now comes down to how badly you want the benefits that the M2 MacBook Air offers. So yep, that's a very simple comparison between the M1 MacBook Air and the M2 MacBook Air while I'm using them side by side. I hope this actually helps you to decide which MacBook Air you should go for. Let me know your thoughts and any questions in the comments down below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so, and we'll see you guys in our next one.